Okay, we're going to start this photo album tour using this book here. And can you tell us a little bit about how you came to design and create this book?
It was a workshop at one of the Germans from Russia conventions. They stressed the importance of writing down your memories for your families, and that's about it. And so then I did manage to talk my sisters into writing theirs and their husbands also. I just told them what they told us, just to, if you think of something, just write it down. We don't care how it's spelled or sentence structure or whatever. Just write it down. You can't expect to remember everything at one time. And so that's what they did. And then I took care of the rest. And same thing with Herb's side, the family. We did the same thing.
Wonderful. So is this something that you've given to your children and stuff
Yes.
so that they have a copy?
I gave each one of my daughters, 2 daughters and son, one of each. And then also the agreement was I would give them to the people that wrote them, like my sisters and Herb's side of the family.
Okay. Well, we're going to start looking through some of them for the photos to kind of get an idea of what it was like growing up for you. I'll let you kind of flip through real quick and find.
Okay. This is kind of self-explanatory. It's my grandpa and grandma Schmier.
So, did you know your grandpa and grandma?
Mm-hmm. They're the ones I mentioned this morning, that I stayed with them for about almost a whole winter, from Christmas to, I don't know, March, I imagine, or April.
When you think back to your childhood, what type of a grandfather was your Grandpa Schmier?
My Grandpa Schmier wasn't the most friendly person. In fact, I didn't particularly like him. I told my mom that too, and she didn't say a word. He was hard. He was, imagine this kind of a life he led in Russia probably made him that way.
How about your grandma?
Oh, she was just wonderful. Everybody just loved my grandmother. She was friendly and just wonderful.
What were their first names?
His was Johann, and hers was Rosina.
And earlier you told a story where you ended up spending a winter with them, but did you ever, on any other occasion, go over and visit and stay the night with them?
Not that I remember, no. It was just usually during the day, probably on a Sunday, we would go over with our parents.
What type of things would they do with when you visited?
Oh, shows around the farm. We loved the farm. My grandma had her house enclosed with a fence, and she had the most beautiful flowers all around the house. And of course, eating was always special too. You know, she fussed a lot when we were there, eating good food.
Did they ever talk to you about what life was like in Russia?
I'm sorry to say no. No.
Do you know when they came over?
I think it was 1803. No, excuse me, 1903. And they came over with an infant son, Jacob. And they landed in, they went as far as Tripp, South Dakota. And they stayed there longer than they had planned because this, Jacob was the name of the infant son. He became ill and he died. So then, I'm not sure how long. Records don't show how long they stayed. Probably 2 weeks or so, and then they moved to their homestead. Interesting thing about them, I have a picture of my great-grandmother, his mother, Grandpa Johann's mother. She came along, and she homesteaded. She lived in a little sod dwelling, they called it, of 26 by 16. And she died in 1911, so I don't know what happened afterwards. I would assume my grandfather probably purchase it or something.
So when they homesteaded, where was that at?
It was 11 miles northwest of Wishick.
What brought them to that area, do you know? Or
I think relatives. There were other relatives of my grandmother. Some of her children, not her children, her sisters and brothers.
So how many children did they have?
5.
Do you
My
know?
grandma lost 3 of them in Russia. Yeah, so
When
my
you
mom,
were,
my mom, and 4 brothers.
when you were growing up, when you visited, did they speak German or did they speak English?
They always spoke German. My grandmother was stubborn. She refused to learn English, she claimed, but I could swear she understood what we said in English.
When you think back, who would you say was the disciplinarian between your grandparents?
Grandpa.
Grandpa. Yeah. Oh yeah. How did they die? And how old were they?
Okay,
Or you?
they moved from the farm. They sold the farm and then they moved to Wishick in 1947. And they bought a little house in Wishick, just a little ways from the church, the Lutheran church that they attended. Let's see, I'm trying to remember when they died. Well, it's on here.
1953 is when Johann died,
Yeah.
and 1959 is when Rosina died.
It was interesting about Grandpa dying. We were living, Herb and I were living with our little son, Clark, in Morristown, South Dakota, and it was during the winter months, and so we couldn't even go to the funeral because he was just an infant. He was just barely born. And then Grandma, she was a diabetic later on in life, and she died of a heart condition. They were going to amputate. She had gangrene in her foot from the diabetes, but the doctor said that her heart's too bad, and she did die of a heart condition, plus the gangrene.
Do you know on the bottom of their tombstone what that says?
Selig sind die Toten, die in dem Herrn sterben. Trying to translate that. I'm not sure how I can translate it. I'm not that well versed in German.
That's not a problem. We can figure that out. So.
Some of it, Toten, is dead. But the word Selig,
Yeah, that was what I...
blessed maybe, could be blessed. Blessed are the dead.
So like sleep in peace or something?
The would be they, them, Herrn, them.
Mm-hmm.
Herrn would be Jesus. Starben, died.
Mm-hmm.
Lose something in translation, but I think that's
yeah. Okay. Is there anything else about your grandparents that you wanted to share with us?
Yeah, they were very strong Christians. My grandpa was deacon for many, many, many years in the church.
You mentioned that they attended a Lutheran religion, and you were raised Reformed, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did that all come into
My
being?
grandfather, Dockter, and the Dockter side that came from Sessenheim, Alsace, which is in kind of a little area between France and Germany. He was also, the Docters were Lutheran. In fact, I've got church pictures of the church in Sessenheim. And the story goes that when grandfather met the love of his life, she was Reformed. And she wouldn't marry him until he promised to turn Reformed. That's the story. That's why we were raised Reformed, and of course then I married her, and I went back to Lutheran Church. My mom always said, whoever you marry, that's the church you go to. Which was interesting because she herself was a Lutheran. So.
Okay. Well, we can go on to another picture
Okay.
if there's one.
This is the farm my grandpa and grandma lived on. This is a summer kitchen. So during the summertime, that's where they did their cooking and their eating. And this house had 4 bedrooms. It's a large house. And so in the summertime, that's where they slept because it was cooler there. And of course, cooking created the heat. So then, as a result, you were better off in the summer kitchen, eating and rather than sleeping. It's a fair size farm. It was a beautiful farm. You can see the house here, how beautiful it is. Note the fence. That's what I mentioned to you earlier. That's where she had all her flowers.
So was this the first house that was on the farm, or did your grandfather build that? Or?
I think they built it. I really don't know. There's no records at all of whether they lived in a... They could have lived in the summer kitchen, too, for all we know. There are no records, so it's just a guessing game.
Do you know how much land they had?
Don't know. That's not on record either, so in fact, we don't even have a book. Herb is the genealogist, and so he did write up a little bit, but that's all we have. And the pictures, they were in the box that we inherited. They're my mom's pictures, yeah.
Such a beautiful home.
Isn't it? Yeah, it is. It was a beautiful home. We just loved to go there.
How far was it from your farm?
I'd say a little over 25 miles or so.
So did you get over there often? Or?
Probably once or twice a year, depending on the weather.
How would you guys get there?
You know, I really can't remember. I suppose later on we drove, but before that, I don't know if my dad even had a car at that point. You know, I just don't know. I was too little. So it could have been by horse and buggy, who knows? That's what they did in those days.
There were 6 girls in your family? Mm-hmm. Would you all go at one time in one car?
Mm-hmm. I imagine we did, because we were all quite close in age. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know, the 6th one didn't come till, can't remember what her birth date is. I know the birthday, but not the year.
How much younger than you is she?
15.
So what was that like for you?
For me, I practically raised her. My mom always said I was so close to her that if anybody does any harm to her, they'd have to answer to me. And she was right. We're still very close. She lives in Hazelton near on a ranch, so very close. And this is Grandpa and Grandma again, Schmier. So, and that's their house again.
What are they doing?
Okay. Johann and Rosanna Schmier standing on the door was, that's my uncle, I think. That's Uncle John. He was the oldest in the family. He never married.
Did you get to know him at all?
Yeah, he was a very nice man. He suffered migraines, and in those days, there's not much they can do for migraines. Could do. He was really sick sometimes, and then he liked to smoke, and I'm sure that didn't help.
Where did he
died.
live?
He I think he lived on the farm for a while, but then after he became so ill, he came back to Wishick and stayed. The other 2 brothers also had moved to Wishick in the meantime. In fact, one of the brothers, they lived in this house. And after he he wasn't in the best of health either. They moved to Wishigan. This is the house they moved to Wishigan, lived in it. It's where the children grew up. So, and Uncle Peter, same thing. In fact, he bought a house not too far from Uncle Godlip, this house. Herb and I, a few years back, I'd say about 5 or 6 years back, went to see the farm. By then it was, of course, sold. And we discovered this root cellar. It was a little ways from the house. Quite surprised. I could never remember a root cellar in that farmyard, but it was there, and you can tell how old it is. This is the inside, but it looked so dilapidated, we were afraid to go down. So this is the picture, the only picture, that's how far we took the picture. These are my parents. And this is another family picture here.
So, do you know how your parents met?
No, not really. That was quite a ways in those days for them to court. In those days, there was a lot of matchmaking. And from what I hear, it was kind of a matchmaking thing.
When you think back to your childhood, how would you describe them as a couple?
As a couple?
Yeah, their marriage.
Mm-hmm. Not the happiest. At first, I guess, they were happy, but later on, no.
When you think back to your mom, what type of a mother was she?
A wonderful mother, and he was a good dad. They just weren't too happy together.
You were born in 1932? 31?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how hard the Dirty 30s were for your parents?
Yes, they were hard. My dad worked for the WPA. I was going to ask her what that meant.
Works Progress
something,
Administration.
Yeah. This is the farm. When my grandfather homesteaded, from the records showing, they built a sod house. And nobody has pictures of the sod house, where it was in the area or anything. And this was, like I said earlier, built in the early 1900s. And that's the house that we were born in. My dad was born in. And it's now in Wishick, but it looks terrible because it's been rented out a few times and nobody takes care of it. So
can you, using this picture, can you kind of point where the bedrooms were and the kitchen was?
Okay. This is what I call the little porch, the four Heisley. Okay. And right behind it is a door that leads into the kitchen. This would be the kitchen window, and this. And then on this side over here was the dining room. Now, the dining room was never used unless there was company. So the doors were always closed, other than when you had company. And then right behind I shouldn't say it's not the dining room, excuse me, the living room. The kitchen was large. I loved the kitchen. It was big. It had a stove in it, a nice long big table for 7 people, benches where we children sat. It had a cupboard, not built in, just a loose cupboard. And also, and of course, the cooking stove and the heating stove. The heating stove was coal, and it heated the whole house. But the living room door was always closed, so that was cold until our company came. Then we'd open it up and heat it up. And the bedrooms were behind there, 2 bedrooms.
So was it a one-story house, or was there 2?
It was a 1-story. Dad had built this to make it look a little bit nicer.
And where was the outhouse?
Right there.
Was that ever hard to get to in the winter times when it was snowy out?
I imagine Dad would shovel, if it was, shovel a path.
What's this back here?
That's the chicken coop. He built this and the outhouse. And this is the smokehouse I've referred to earlier. He built that and this and this. This is my mom every spring would order 100 chickens, and this had a fence around it, and until they were large enough to let out, and then they'd be trained to go in here. And at night, you always have them go into the chicken coop at night, or else dogs or a fox would come along and kill them.
And then what is this building?
That's the garage. And that's the windmill, of course, the barn.
So is this where you hauled water from?
Mm-hmm. This was the place. It was really quite good drinking water.
So is this here then the garden?
Mm-hmm. Right back here is the garden then. It's more like in here. You can see these little white spots, the chickens. Yeah.
So when you were growing up, where would your sisters and you play as a little girl?
Always in here, in this area. There were trees there. And we just did our own. As far as toys, we hardly had any toys. Too poor. We'd have little matchbox. We use them for vehicles. We'd put little wheels on them. I don't know how we did that, but we did. We'd make little farm yards with little sticks and put little buildings inside. We were quite creative, you had to be. And that's how we played. In the wintertime, there was a lot of snow all over the place. It was so high that we could build igloos. We'd dig and make a big opening, and then we'd crawl in and play inside. Once in a while on Sunday afternoons, we try to play little baseball, but we weren't very good at it. But we did try.
Did you have a ball and a bat?
Oh, we did that. Well, I think we had a stick. I remember my dad would make these walking sticks. Have you ever heard of walking sticks? I would used to walk on walking sticks. And we shared one bicycle. We shared things that Grandpa or my dad built for us, like one buggy, a doll buggy, and a doll, and always shared everything.
The doll, did your mom make clothes for it, or did you?
She did. Yeah. And then when we were a little bit older, she let us use a sewing machine, and we could do our own thing, because she'd always have material left over from dresses.
Where would she get the material from to make the dresses and stuff?
I think they used to go to Aberdeen a lot. They never went up here to Bismarck, but they went to Aberdeen a lot and bought material.
How far was Aberdeen from Victoria?
I think it's at least 100 miles.
So it was quite the trip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a day's trip. And this is, I have close-up pictures of the house.
Oh, okay.
And some of these.
There's the chickens.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So you said that she would get like 100 chickens. Where would she get them from?
Down in Venturia. Yeah, but I think it was the creamery would order chickens for everybody. That was the thing to do then. So little baby chicks. Then you'd have, they would have a little heater inside this little chicken coop. And they had little bottles that somehow worked. There was a kind of a stand to them, and that would let the water out, so the chickens have a little water to drink and their food. I can't remember what she fed them, but I'm sure it was something she bought, or maybe they grew. I don't know.
So Venturia, what was in Venturia when you were growing up?
Grocery store, I think 2 bars, elevator, lumber yard, schoolhouse. My grandpa lived down there, and there were quite a few. I really can't tell you how many people, but there were quite a few people living there at that time. And there was a Lutheran church, the Reformed church, the Baptist church. That's all I know. There could have been a Catholic church, but I'm not quite sure.
How often would you get to town?
Well, only to buy groceries. And at first, our church, the Reformed church, was on the farm. I mean, it was about 2 miles from our farm. That's when we were little. This. So that's where we went to church for years. And then, of course, history here. I think, anyway, this was moved in by 1923. And so then we went to Church de Venturia.
So when you say that you would go to town to get groceries, your family was pretty much self-sufficient. What would they need for groceries? What would they need from town?
That's a good question. Boy, milk. No, we had our milk, we had our eggs, we had our cream. Well, the eggs we sold in town and the cream we sold in town. So those two items were usually used for groceries. Cereals, flour, sugar, yeast to bake. I think that's about all until later on.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and start talking about the pictures on this
Okay.
page. So,
These are my sisters. Like I said earlier, we're all close in age. I was born in 31. Thelma was born in 32. Eleanor was born in 33. And Loretta was born in 34.
so let's start out with Thelma's the next oldest.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with Thelma. Why don't you tell me a little bit about
Okay.
her personality as a little girl?
Oh. Thelma, my mom always said she was so fast and everything. Her talking, her working, and everything. Thelma and I got along very well. In fact, we all did. We all got along very well. She was pretty. She was the prettiest in the family. Everybody, all my sisters and I thought the same thing. She looked more like my mom's side of the family. She had asthma real bad, so she wasn't able to be out in the yard as much as we were. She wasn't able to go out and work in the field like we did. And a lot of times she'd wake up in the middle of the night and she couldn't breathe and scared us to death. She also had eczema when she was tiny, when she was a baby. But somehow that cleared up. And my mom said the doctor had said one time that Thelma's going to have to marry a city boy. She's no good on the farm. Too many allergies for her. Which is what she did. She married a barber.
With asthma back then, what would they do for that?
Nothing. There's nothing. I don't remember ever seeing Thelma or them giving her any medication. You just had to get over it. I don't know how, but I remember how scared I was many a time when she had an attack.
And then
Eleanor.
Eleanor's
She's the
next?
one with the two bows in her hair.
Okay.
She's the one with the curly hair. She and Thelma, they used to gang up on me. They used to like to tease me. They'd get by with it. My mom could never figure out why I'd never get mad at them. But I didn't. I loved them. I just didn't. That wasn't my personality. I'd be hurt, yes, but I would never, I'd get over it. I'm young, you get over things. And they're both married to brothers.
Really?
Yeah, Birch.
How did that come to be?
Well, Venturia was a small area, and that's a good question. Don't know how they... By then I was dating Herb. I was too busy with my own life to pay much attention to those two.
Well, now you've got a question to ask them.
Yeah.
And then the next one
Is Loretta.
Loretta.
She was the sensitive one in the family. Yeah, and it still shows. She's so far away. She's divorced. And she's the one that lives in Eugene. And she's poor. She's got 3 wonderful children. One is ill emotionally. And so she's dealing with it. But she was very sweet.
And And then the next one is...
Is Priscilla.
Priscilla.
Priscilla's the one that died in '84. Yeah. She and Loretta also married brothers. Eureka from Eureka. And that's, you don't ask me how that happened. By then I was gone. But they did. Unfortunately, Priscilla died, her husband died, so it just left the three girls, three wonderful nieces I have.
How about you? What was your personality as a little girl?
Well, I was shy, very shy. I'll remember when I was sent to school, my dad would drop me off at the door, the schoolroom. It was a 4-schoolroom schoolhouse. And so he would take me inside and just drop me off at the school where I was supposed to, the door where I was supposed to go in. I was so shy, I was afraid to go into that schoolroom. Well, somehow the teacher must have realized I was out there, and she opened the door and let me in. I was very shy, scared. But I was happy.
When the baby came, how did your parents explain a new baby in the house when you were 15?
When I was 15, well, I knew my mother was pregnant, of course. We knew that much. We knew quite a bit. In fact, when Herb was dating me, I don't know if I should tell you this, we weren't engaged by then yet, but he figured that I don't know much as far as sex is concerned, so he bought me a book. And don't tell him I said that. And my sisters and I, my mom didn't know this, my sisters and I would go into our bedroom and we'd look at that book and we'd giggle. Learned a lot. Like I wouldn't know anything. I was the one that helped Dad with birthing as far as the cows were concerned, you know.
You did have
Yeah,
to
oh
do
yeah.
that.
I have. Well, like I said earlier, I was my dad's son also.
So what would be involved with birthing a cow? I mean, nobody's ever talked about that.
Well, so many times, and this still happens to this day, a cow just can't. Just can't. The calf just doesn't come. So now, I don't know what they do now, but in my day, my dad asked me to come out, and I was the oldest one, and they figured I'd know the best, know the most. And so he would take a rope and get inside and try to pull it out, and I would help him try to get inside that poor cow and tie this rope around the legs and then start pulling. That's how it came out. Sometimes they weren't alive and sometimes they were because it took so long.
Do you remember the first time you had to help your dad with that?
Not really, no. It's been too long ago. I do remember him calling me and asking him to come out and help him. That's about all, and I did. And it was no big deal to me.
So do you remember the day your sister was born?
Very well.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, she was born in Eureka, South Dakota, and of course we were all at home waiting. And my dad finally came home and he said, our mom was in a coma and Priscilla was fine, doing fine. Now, of course, we didn't know what a coma was, but I don't remember how long she was in the hospital, but she was in as long as Priscilla was in.
How far was Eureka?
Oh, excuse me, not Priscilla. That was Diane. I'm sorry.
Oh.
That was this one. This is Diane. She was born at home.
Okay.
But you know, in those days, what they did was they had to go somewhere else. Either that or you were in a different room because it was just not the thing to see. Of course, we wouldn't want to see it anyway, but my mom had a midwife, but I was forgotten. Diane is the one that was born in Eureka, South Dakota, in the hospital there, and she was the one my mom was in the coma with.
With Diane, why was she born in Eureka? What was the...
Well, I think at that time, it was the thing to do. Midwives were becoming obsolete.
How far was Eureka from your home?
25, 30 miles, something like that.
So tell me a little bit about Diane's
Diane,
personality.
Yeah, so sweet and very soft-hearted. She said not long, her daughter Lauren lives up here, and she's anchor woman at one of the TV stations, and had just bought a house this fall, and a lot of work. So I told Diane, Diane's got a MS. She's not in the wheelchair, but she has to be very careful. So I said, you're not going to do that whole house by yourself. I'm going to help you. And it was so much fun for the two of us to work together. Enjoyed it immensely.
When she was born, how did that change your life, being a 15-year-old girl at home? How did that change your life?
I was very protective of her, and I really did take care of her a lot. My mom just wasn't healthy. And so I did. My mom always said I raised her. She and I were very close, and we still are to this day. In fact, Herb and I used to take her with us when we'd go dating. So, and I think my mom was happy we did that. There was a third person around. No trouble. She's married, and she's got 3 children. One is a nurse, and Lauren, who is an anchor woman on television, and Dana, their son, he's in Minneapolis. He's still going off to school off and on, and is working in the hospital.
So you probably, more than most people I've interviewed, have experience with diapers and bottles.
Oh, yes.
You want to talk a little bit about what a baby entailed back then?
Oh, gosh, yeah. That's a lot of work, especially we had no plumbing, but we did have electricity at that time. And you boiled the bottles. And we did it when Clark was born, too. We boiled their bottles at that point, too. I'm not sure what kind of milk. I can't remember that far back. It's a long ways. It's a long time ago. But the milk, if they use cow's milk, of course, that's always boiled. We never drank cow's milk unless it was boiled. Sanitary reasons and safety.
So would you chill it after it was boiled?
Oh yeah, you chill it in the refrigerator. By then, of course, we had a fridge. And even if it wouldn't have, it would have been down in that cellar. We had it cool. Lots of diapers to wash. Oh my. That was a mess.
So they were cloth then?
They were all cloth, yeah. And our son, too, when he was born, I had all cloth diapers. So I should have been used to it by then.
What about teething? Like, did they have things for when they were teething back then?
They had a little drops in a bottle. Now, I'm not sure what they were called, but they rubbed that onto the gooms. And that was supposed to kind of, probably had a little bit of alcohol in it too, just a little bit, tiny bit, just to kind of calm it down a little bit. I don't know. But that's all I remember.
How would your mom do the cleaning and stuff with a little infant to take care of?
Well, she had all her other girls home yet. Since I was the oldest one, the others were still home too. I was 15, 14, 13, 12.
So did you guys help out on the farm then?
Oh, yes. Yes. When I said I was my father's son, I meant it. The first time I remember helping out thrashing, I was about 14. And I mentioned that earlier. We had a heather box. Now, don't ask me how that's pronounced in English. I wouldn't know. But that's where the shocks were thrown in, and then you pulled it up to the thrashing machine and threw it into that area where the belt, it was fed into a belt, and so on and so on. That's what I did first. Milking cows, we milked like 18 to 20 cows. And it was all done by hand. Separating was done by hand. There was no machines like they have now.
Talk about separating for a moment. What do you mean by that?
Okay, there's a big, I'm not an engineer, so I can't exactly explain it as well as somebody that has that knowledge. it's a big top on the machine, and you pour the milk into this let's say pail, okay? And then, oh boy, Herb could do better than this. There's a handle, and it's controlled by a belt, and you just turn with this handle, and that turns that inner apparatus, whatever it's called, and that separates the milk from the cream. There's sort of little discs in which causes the milk to separate from the cream. And there's two little pipes. I wish I could show you one, but I can't. I don't have one picture of one. And that one end is the milk comes out, the separated milk comes out, and the other end cream comes out. So I'm sorry, that's the best I could do.
I think I get it. I think. We'll see. Okay, what's this here?
This is a school picture. This is me. Now I'm wearing slacks. And my sister Thelma is wearing, this is Thelma. She's wearing a dress, a skirt, and a suit jacket. This is a young man here. His name is Alvin Haas, and he's wearing overalls. You can see all the variation of clothes. And this is our teacher, Arthur Geet, and he's all dressed up in a shirt and tie.
So did you have a lot of men teachers when you were growing up?
2 of them, and 1 lady. The lady was, she was the 1st and 2nd grade teacher. And then he was the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teacher.
You said you attended a school that had 4 different rooms?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that. That's kind of different.
Yeah, it is. They built that schoolhouse, I believe it was in 1923, using 2 rooms for two classes for each room, or 2 grades for each room. And then later on, when I went to school, they decided only to hire, in other words, they had to hire 4 teachers. Then later on, they decided to hire only 3. So then they had the 1st and 2nd grade, that didn't change, together. Then they had the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade together for 1 teacher. And then the 6th, 7th, and 8th together for 1 teacher. So they only had hired 3 teachers. But prior to that, they had hired 4 teachers and 2 grades to a room.
How far was the school from your house?
About 2 miles. And we all took lunch along. We had little syrup buckets. And usually it was, since there was no refrigeration, they had to use the homemade bread, and my mom put peanut butter and syrup or peanut butter and jelly on the bread, and then we had an apple and orange, either apple or orange, or maybe a cookie or something in this gallon pail each one had. And I don't know what we drank. I have no idea.
You know, I keep hearing over and over and over again, syrup.
Mm-hmm.
Is this like maple syrup, like what we put on pancakes today? What is
Caro.
syrup?
This is called Caro syrup, and they came in gallon buckets, and that's what parents bought, a whole gallon, because they had a large family, and it went quite a ways.
So what did it taste like?
Oh, it was delicious. Syrup and peanut butters, you should try it. It is so good. I still like it to this day.
So is it the texture of like a maple syrup type of thing?
Yeah,
or?
yeah.
Okay.
It's probably a little bit stiffer than a maple syrup would be. And you mix the 2 together, the peanut butter and the syrup, and it's almost like dessert.
So
I don't know.
you would mix it together before you would put it on the bread, so that the bread wouldn't get soggy. And
Right. That was on your table all the time. And homemade jelly sometimes. We always had homemade jellies. And sometimes you would put peanut butter and then spread the peanut butter on the bread and then the jelly on top. So sometimes we had that too. But there was never meat because it wasn't safe. Because that was Even
So-
in those days, they knew what was safe and what wasn't.
Peanut butter, did they buy peanut butter from the grocery store, or did they make peanut butter?
Mm-mm. They bought it, and again, large jars of peanut butter. I think that was probably a household ingredient in every household that I can remember.
Besides peanut butter on sandwiches, what else would that be used for?
Peanut butter to bake, but Karo syrup. I think you could make some kind of a candy with the syrup. We never did.
Interesting. I've just never have asked. I've heard about syrup and been picturing maple syrup, but I didn't really think that sounded right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, let's go over to this picture here.
Yeah. Well, this is basically. Let's see. I think we're a little younger on this one. I was going to mention to you. These are the dresses. My mom sewed. These are the dresses. All the bows and everything she sewed.
So who would do your hair up like this?
Nobody. They were just natural. We were, like I said, we can thank our mom for that.
So did you ever have a curling iron at home or things like that? Did your mom often make you dresses that were the same so that you would...
I think she did until we got older. Of course, then we didn't want homemade dresses anymore, and then we'd go to Aberdeen and shop for our dresses. I can tell here, this is me, and this is Thelma, Eleanor, Loretta, Priscilla, and Diane. They're all homemade. We all made our own dresses. I made my girls' dresses for until the time came they didn't want me to make them anymore.
So who taught you how to sew?
We did ourselves. I took some homemade classes, adult education classes at night. That helped too.
Okay.
Where we talked about Mom and Dad, the farm. Here's the barn. My dad was so proud of his car. So was my mom. I tried to find some more. I didn't have enough time. I don't even know. I think it was a, would you know? Fleet Line. I think it was a Plymouth or something. Herb would know.
So did you
Oh,
have
this
to...
here. This big truck. And the hay is, the hay is in the back of the truck. He would prepare. We would do the haying. I would help with the haying. Show you a picture. Oh, I'm in the back. I'm doing this backwards. No, I'm not. Yeah, it has to be back here somewhere. Here. This is what we'd be doing. This is my sister, Thelma. Now, I can't quite figure out why she was out there since she had so much trouble with asthma. This is me, and this is her. My mom always made us wear straw hats because of the sun.
Really?
And long sleeves. But this is a haystack, and she and my mom or another sister I would bring it to the area with the rake, and they would stack it. And then my dad would bring it home and put it up here. This was a fairly long barn, and so it could hold quite a bit of hay, and that was used during the winter months.
So in the winter months, would you keep the cows and the animals in the barn?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who was responsible for cleaning the barn?
My dad.
Did you ever have to help him?
Oh, once in a while, we would probably kind of push it down where the cows were. That was a little bit slanted, so you could push it down. The floor was slanted this way, and there was a flat floor that up here like this. It was like this. So we'd push it down maybe, but this is a picture of my dad a long time ago. I don't know when it was taken. My mom and dad were very young when they got married.
you think about your dad, how did he express affection when you were growing up?
The only way he knew how, and that was by never scolding us. But by gosh, when we deserved it, we got it. But he was a very gentle, kind, quiet man. He could sit hours without saying one word. Very patient with us because he had 5 daughters, 6 later on. And when it was time to go to church or a wedding or something, he would get ready first. Then he'd go sit in the living room and just wait. He would never say, girls and Mom, it's time to go, etc. He'd just wait. You never heard a word out of him until we told him we can go now. Oh, that's patience, if you ask me.
Yes, definitely. How about, you mentioned that he would scold you when it was
Oh,
needed.
yeah, when it was needed, and we knew it was needed.
What was discipline like from your parents when you were growing up? How would they discipline you if you stepped out of line?
Well, raised their voices, I guess. My dad always threatened us with a belt. The belt was hanging somewhere, especially when we were little. And we knew he'd use it. We knew he meant it. My mom, she raised her voice more than my dad. She had to, because she was the one that was around us all the time. My dad only had to raise his voice once, and you behaved yourself. You knew when he raised his voice, you better be quiet. Never talked back, never to our parents, never. I wouldn't want it to talk back because I'd hate to think of what would have happened.
Okay.
This is the ship. My grandparents, my doctor grandfather, which is he, came over on in 1885. And they landed in Minnow, South Dakota.
Did you know your doctor grandparents?
Yes, not my grandmother. My grandmother died at she was 47 years old in 1926. No, there are no pictures of my grandmother. I tried for years to find a picture. There just aren't any. I have one aunt left, my dad's youngest sister. She's 90, and she hasn't got a picture either.
How old was she when she passed away?
She was 47. Yeah.
Okay. And do you know how she passed away?
Yes, she had gallstones. At least that's what the article said. Now, I had my aunt write her memories, and she said it could have been cancer because she was really suffered a long time.
Okay, so what do we have here?
This is the Venturia Cemetery where most of the doctors are buried. And this is the great-grandparents of mine, which would be my grandfather's parents. And they came over here in 1885, and they went to Minnow, South Dakota. And the records show that the reason they went to Minnow, South Dakota is because my great-grandmother's parents came 10 years earlier, and they settled in that area and farmed in that area. But 4 years later, they came and homesteaded in McIntosh County. And the records don't show why. They thought maybe it was because of the availability of land in McIntosh County. So then my grandfather and my great-grandfather each got a homestead land. And let's see, Venturia wasn't there at that time. Venturia first came into play in 1901, I think. But they were, well, 85, be 89, 1889 is then when they homesteaded in that area, McIntosh area. And my great-grandfather's land was about a fourth a mile of my grandfather's land. And records show that they both built sod houses, and I mentioned that earlier. But why we don't have pictures of them, we don't know. And then later in the early 90s, they built the wood house.
And you never knew them, right? Your great-grandparents?
No,
They
I
passed
never
away
knew.
before you were
Yeah,
around.
they died in, let's see, grandmother died in 1918 and grandfather in 1912, I think. Yeah, that's 12.
Do you know how many children they had?
Yeah, well, I can just find that out in a minute. Would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them.
And all 7 came over from Russia with them?
Right.
So what were your grandparents' names?
They were Gottlieb Jr., since his father's name was Gottlieb, he was senior, and my grandmother's name was Magdalena. She was a Bender.
Do you know if there's any relation to the Benders down in the Wishick area?
I really don't know. Probably distantly. It seems like we're related to everybody, you know. And this is grandfather, Dockter, and that's the stone in Venturia.
Where are they buried? In
Venturia, same cemetery as his grandparents were.
You knew your grandfather Gottlieb, right? Junior?
Yes, yes.
And I'm sorry, what was his wife's name?
Yeah,
Christina?
Gottlieb. Hers was sorry. Magdalena was great-grandfather's. My great-grandmother, I'm sorry,
Okay.
that's my mistake. And then Christina was my
Okay.
grandmother. I never knew her.
She's the one that passed away.
Right,
Okay.
right.
So tell me a little bit about your grandfather. What type of a grandpa was he?
Well, he was a very helpful grandfather. After my parents got married, they lived on the homestead. And he was generous too. He gave each of his children 2 quarters of land. 1 quarter as a gift, and the 2nd quarter to pay back whenever they could. So that I would call generosity. So he was a very generous man. When my parents got married and moved onto the farm, he bought a house in Venturia. And he still had my dad was the 3rd youngest, and he had 2 sisters. One was 9, and I'm not sure how old. Aunt Ella was 9. I'm not sure how old the other one was, Eva. But he raised them in town then. In fact, I've got my only living aunt. She wrote her memories too. He would come out. It was about 2 miles from Venturia, where we lived. He'd come out most every day, and he'd do errands. Sometimes he'd even walk out. And it was like 2 miles out there. But he would walk when the weather was nice. And he'd help out any way he could. I remember when my sister Thelma and I joined 4-H. He would come out and pick us up. He had a coupe. So we would sit in the back of the coupe. I wish we'd have pictures of it. I just love this vehicle. But he would come and pick us up and take us home. And in the wintertime, when the weather was so bad that Dad couldn't pick us up, he would keep us, he'd feed us. We'd be from school, if he couldn't pick us up from school. Then he would take care of us, and we loved it there. At least I did.
So did he ever remarry?
He was married twice. His first wife died. I have one half uncle. That was his first wife's child, and there's 2 or 3 others that died prior to that. It does not say where. She must have died in the area. She was his first wife, and she's the one that's buried on the farm because there was no cemetery at that point in time. The church, the people did their service in various houses. And so there's no pictures.
Was your
my grandmother.
Oh, okay.
And he had, there were 11 children born to the second one.
Did he speak English?
Probably not, but he understood. He's the one that, he was a very religious man, Christian man, and he read his Bible from one cover to the other end. And he could tell us stories. I loved to listen to his stories from the Bible. That's where I really knew what the Bible was all about, is from him. And people really liked him in town, especially the pastors. They would discuss and I'm sure argue about what this says and that says in the Bible. Yeah, he was a very kind and generous person.
So would you say he was a successful farmer if he was
Yes,
able to give?
I would think he was a successful farmer if he was able to afford to give each child land, a quarter. So.
When you think back, is there anything else about your grandfather that you really wanted to add to your history?
I loved my grandfather. He died in 1950, and that was really hard. In fact, that was the first funeral I had ever attended, was my grandfather.
How old were you?
Let's see, he died in 50, and I was born in 31.
29?
No, I was about 19, yeah. Herb and I at that time were engaged, but I really missed him for a long time, because he was the one that was around all the time. When we needed him, he was there for us.
Can you tell me what the funeral was like for you? What was that like back then?
You know, I really can't remember. I think I blocked it out because I really didn't want him to die. I just can't remember. Nothing about it, except his body in the grave, in the coffin. That's about all I can remember.
You mentioned that you had this picture of your great-grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Let's bring that in right now.
She's the one I told you about earlier. She came along with Grandpa and Grandma Schmier.
This right
And she's the one that applied for homestead. And of course, during that time, when you're applying, you had to live on the property for 5 years, something like that. And she's the one that was living in that 26 by 16-foot sod house.
She did this by herself, was that?
Well, I would think her son, my grandfather, helped her. And it's about all I know of her, about her at all. Her husband died in Nydorf, and that's why she didn't want to stay alone. He was the only child. Now, it doesn't say if she lost children, if she had miscarriage or what. It doesn't say. So he had no brothers or sisters here. And as far as we know, there weren't any over there either, so they probably, if there were any more, they would died.
Is this one of the only pictures?
That's the only one we've got, yeah. I'm surprised we have that. She's buried in a cemetery near Peace Lutheran Church, which is the homestead Grandpa and Grandma Schmier lived on was 11 miles northwest of Wishick. And I would assume that's not very far from there, about 8 miles, where she's buried. And the sad thing here is, I went out years ago to find her gravestone and take pictures of it. Well, there isn't any. So I talked to some of my cousins, and it was said that there was no fence around the cemetery, and they started using part of the cemetery to drive through with their wagons and stuff. So underneath, somewhere in that area where the path is, that's where she's at. And I cannot even find records of her death. I've looked all over, and we can't find records. So at one point, I guess, was it a church or they burned down? So.
Okay. What do we have over here?
This is, of course, my grandfather, Dockter. This is my only living aunt, his youngest daughter. And she's 90 years old. In fact, this month, she's going to be at 90. This is a picture of my mom, schoolhouse, my Uncle Gottlieb, and Uncle Fred, her two brothers.
So where did they attend school?
Well, I must have been in that area. I just don't know. There are no records. As far as I know, her probably would know, because that's the area that he grew up.
Okay. So
But
you
I
said
don't.
Fred.
This is Gottlieb,
Gottlieb,
and this is Fred. Fred was the youngest one.
So did you know them when you were
Oh
growing
yes,
up?
oh yes.
What type of uncles were they?
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're the ones that we had so much fun with. This, not Uncle Gottlieb. I'm thinking this is Uncle Fred. He was single for a long time. He was a teaser, and he's the one that suffered the migraines so bad. So.
Your aunt, what type of an aunt was she when you were a kid?
Well, you know, I never got to see much of my uncles and aunts. Like I said, my folks were not sociable people. But later on years that I really got to know her. She lives in Eureka, South Dakota, in a nursing home there.
So
She's very nice.
when you were a kid, you said your parents weren't sociable. How often would you see aunts and uncles?
Not very often. The only one I remember is my Uncle Julius. My dad and my Uncle Julius could not get along, and they didn't live too far away. I'd say about 1.5 miles from our farm, but I did get to know my cousins there, so we would go back and forth and visit.
The other aunts and uncles, how far did they live away
Well,
from you?
Uncle Albert was the closest. His wife was also really a friend of my mom's, a good friend of my mom's, his childhood friends. So we got to see him a lot, and his wife. Unfortunately, she died before my mom did, and then he moved to Ashley and married again, and they both are gone.
Okay.
And then my Uncle Emil, he lived quite a ways, so we really never got to know him too well. My Uncle Leopold lived, I'd say, about 3 miles from our place, but we didn't get to know them too well either. I don't think any of them were very sociable people. They just weren't. They were too busy trying to make a living, having a lot of children and having to make a living for them. So.
Okay.
This is my confirmation picture. You know, these are not very good pictures because what I did was I copied them all off the print shop, and they just didn't turn out. I did this for all my sisters, and so they didn't turn out the best.
So tell me what confirmation was like.
Okay, we had a tough pastor. He was a disciplinarian, believe me. We only went to confirmation for 6 weeks, and that was right after school. We would go to Ashley for confirmation, and so we had to commute. And we only had one car and a big truck, so my dad would take us over, and we boarded over there, one room, like a bedroom, and Mom would send a little food with us for a week. And then we would spend most of our time in church studying, and half German and half English. And I'll never forget, he said, you better remember a lot of memory work. There was a lot of it. You better remember, and it was all German. No, some was English. I'm not going to tell you what you're going to have to recite at the confirmation day. And we were just scared to death. We were scared of him, too. But he was, you know, he's a good Christian, but tough. So I remember praying the night before, because I was afraid I was going to blow it, you know. Well, I didn't. I think the good Lord took pity on me, and I don't remember what the verse was. All I remember is I didn't blow it. And this is my sister Thelma. Since we had a commute back and forth, my sister and I, she was right in age, she's a year younger than I am, it was cheaper to do it this way. And then my sister Loretta and Eleanor, they waited a year so that she was old enough to be confirmed, did the same thing.
So how old were you when you were confirmed?
I was 15 and she was 14. So this is my cousin. This is our cousin. He's no longer living. He died of cancer a few years ago. You know, I don't even know. I don't remember some of their names.
So
this is a long time
you said
ago.
you boarded in Ashley. Was this a place that just you and your sister stayed?
Yeah, we just stayed there. We had a bedroom and a little heating stove, and that was it. So for 6 weeks we did that. You know, Dad would, every weekend he would come home and pick us up because there were no classes on Saturday and Sunday. So then he'd take us back again Monday morning. And
was that kind of scary for you and your sister, or more like an adventure and staying in Ashley by yourself?
well, we enjoyed where we stayed. The lady was really nice. I'm sure they were members of that church. And we liked her very much. And she treated us so nicely. But we weren't looking forward to our classes that well because, like I said, we were afraid of him. Pastor Kruger. I'll never forget his name either.
So was he the pastor of your country church?
He was, yes, he was the pastor of our, at that time, our country church was no longer. We were in, we had a church in town.
Was it in the town of Ashley? Or
Venturia.
Okay.
But he did the service in Venturia and in Ashley. So, and since he lived in Ashley, I imagine that's why we had to go to Ashley.
Interesting.
So.
Okay.
And then this is the house in Wishick now. I think I said earlier, this was the house that they moved, the one from the farm to Wishick, and then they added the garage.
And it's deteriorating now, is what you said?
Oh, it's terrible, just terrible. But that's what happens when you're no longer around, you know. It's not no longer ours. This is the other picture. I just grabbed some of the pictures, that's why there's doubles. This one, you can tell again, look. Mom, all the dresses she made.
Look at the hair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we always had bows.
So who would make your bows?
My mom.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm the one in the back there. That's me.
With straight hair?
Straightest hair. Yeah.
So out of all your sisters, I know you said you were really a close family. But out of all of your sisters, who would you say you were closest to when you were
Diane.
a kid? Okay.
We had a reunion we have had on the Dockter side, my great-grandfather. And we just had it last year, the second one. And this is part of my family. This is me. This is my sister Loretta. This is Thelma. This is Diane. And let's see who's missing here. Should be 4 of us. Yeah, this is the 4 of us. Okay. Eleanor. Eleanor's over here. Okay. And then this is our daughter, Herb and my daughter, Clarice. And Cheryl, the other daughter. And this is the daughter to the Cheryl, our granddaughter. And this one's her daughter too. And then the mother and her 2 children, my 2 grandchildren. And the husbands are here too. This is a niece whose parents, her mom died and her dad died of mine. Her mom was my sister. They came, and then the others. Niece here and her husband, my son-in-law to her, my son-in-law to her, and son-in-law to her. Son-in-law to her. And the rest are still all cousins. Now, this is my dad's brothers and sisters and their spouses. That's all it is. This is my uncle, Leopold, and his wife. I'm sorry about my finger.
Nope, that's good.
And this is my half-uncle. He's the one whose mother is Ava Lear, and his wife, okay? And this is my aunt and her husband, another aunt and her husband, my mom and my dad, my aunt and her husband, another aunt and her husband. No, excuse me, this is my uncle. Get confused here. And it's his wife. another uncle. This is Uncle Albert. I should mention names, I guess. I don't know. And Uncle Albert's wife, Lydia. This is Uncle Emil and his wife. And this is Aunt Leah and her husband. That's it.
Who was the uncle that was the cheeser, the one that?
Oh, this is the other side.
Other
I don't
side?
have, I'm sorry
Okay.
to say, I have no pictures of them
That side.
like this.
It's a great
This is
picture.
just the Dockter side.
Do you know about when this picture was taken?
I have no idea when it was taken. My grandfather was still alive, and he died in 1950, so it was prior to that. It's quite early because some of these, like she married the second time, my aunt, she married the second time, and this is her first husband. And same thing here. She lost her first husband, him, and she married the second time. So it's, I would think it'd be some time in the 40s.
Okay, and what
Okay.
picture should we look at next?
Okay, let's look at those two. Well, we talked about them before, just show the pictures. Okay. My mom and dad, and this is my grandfather, and all his children, 11 of them.
Can you go through that one and tell me the names of them?
Okay. Edwin, oh boy, you know, I can't remember all the names.
Tell me who you know.
Okay. Pardon? Oh, those I know. It's some of my aunts that I'd never seen. This is Uncle Godlip. He's the half uncle. Uncle Albert, Uncle Leopold, Aunt Ella. She's the one that's still living. Uncle Emil, Aunt Leah, Uncle Julius. Andrew Haas's wife, Magdalena. My dad, my grandfather, Eva. That's it.
Okay.
And then my mom and dad, and oh, this is my grandpa and grandma Schmier. You saw that before. And then I'll point you these. Okay, you saw this one. It's myself, Loretta, Thelma, Eleanor, Priscilla, and Diane. This is Loretta, high school picture. Priscilla's gone, died in '84. And this is Diane when she was a little tyke, and her husband Dave and Diane. My sister Eleanor and her husband Leonard. Thelma, my sister, and Jonathan. Herb and I, and you saw this one before. And then this is my mom and dad, and the rest of my sister, Diane and her husband Dave, Loretta and her husband Ben, Eleanor and her husband Leonard, Priscilla and her husband Gideon, Thelma and her husband John, and I and Herb. That's it.
Okay.